Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Urban Legends video. Several of you have requested this particular urban legend, so I'll go ahead and I'll talk about it here. And I guess maybe in a couple of weeks or a month or two, I'll go over again some new options with regards to other urban legends. Now, with regards to this particular urban legend, it's nothing really supernatural or paranormal or any kind of haunting or dead persons or anything like that, like as far as one would usually think the traditional urban legend is. Rather, this is more like an urban legend about, as weird as it sounds, about safety, and then how this particular urban legend essentially took a life of its own once people started to think to themselves, oh my god, my life could be in danger if this particular urban legend is true. So when one urban legend I'm talking about is about headlight flashing, i.e. not flashing your headlights under certain circumstances while you're driving in your car. And doing some research on this particular urban legend, there seems to be a consensus as far as the date. It would be somewhere around the mid to early 90s where this particular legend took place, but it's kind of hard to pinpoint exactly where it started, because it seems like all at once this urban legend was nothing and then it was everywhere. So it's kind of hard to pinpoint where exactly it started, but it looks like we do have at least a real life incident that could have influenced the creation of this urban legend. So it's not exactly the same thing, but it's pretty close. And apparently, if we go back in time to 1992, in Stockton, California, there was a woman by the name of Kelly Freed, who was a school secretary, and she was the passenger on one of the cars. The info doesn't state exactly who she was driving with, but she was the passenger of that car. And as they were driving, they came across a car that was filled with some teenage kids, and these kids had forgotten to turn on their headlights. So, being the good Samaritans that they were, the car, once it pulled up right next to them, Kelly essentially motioned to them, pointing or doing something with her hands to make them point to or look towards their headlights, so that way she could indicate to them that the headlights weren't on. So again, with this particular origination, nobody flashed their headlights. Rather, in this case, Kelly motioned or did something with her hands to make them point. But these young punk teenage kids thought that it was some kind of insult. They thought maybe she might have been throwing some kind of signs or doing something insulting to them. And so it was taken as a quote-unquote sign of disrespect. So apparently these kids followed them and then essentially killed them. It was that blunt as far as the story goes. But the kids that killed them apparently weren't involved in any kind of gang, and they weren't doing it in terms of any kind of ritual. The police that did this case, and eventually two kids were convicted of murder. The police stated that there was nothing, again, gang related with this. But once this story essentially came to be and started printing around the newspapers, that's when it started taking on a life of its own, because people, you know how that game goes, where if you give let's say you line up 10 people in a row and you give certain information to the person on the left, and then that person passes on that info to the next person, and then that person passes on to the next person, and so on and so forth. By the time it gets to the 10th person in line, the info might still be the same, but there are a lot of differences on there. And so it looks like with this particular tale, with this poor woman, Kelly Freed, what happened to her, once people started talking about it and mentioning it to others, it eventually took on a life of its own, where instead of somebody motioning with their hands to indicate, that the headlights are off, it instead became, don't flash your headlights, otherwise somebody, in terms of gang members, will kill you. So that's how it came to be, essentially, when it came to this urban legend. And explode it did. This was at a time when faxes were prevalent, and faxes were being sent left and right by people who would receive the fax, read it, and then think to themselves, oh my god, this is real. Let me go ahead and I'll share it with so-and-so family member or so-and-so coworker to make sure that there's nothing associated in terms of danger with them. And these faxes, which one you'll see a picture of here, became pretty prevalent, and it became to a point where, again, it was nothing, and then at another point it was all around something on there. And then with the rise of the email in the, let's say, mid-90s going forward, all of a sudden this urban legend again took on a life of its own. So it kind of died down after the faxes came and went, but then with the rise of the email, all of a sudden this urban legend found yet another format to go around with, and it came and it exploded again, and people started passing it like it was nothing. So here's an example of one of the emails that was sent back in 1998. It says, "Read and heed. A police officer working with the DARE program has issued this warning. If you are driving after dark and see an oncoming car with no headlights on, do not flash your lights at them. This is a common gang member initiation game that goes like this. The new gang member under initiation drives along with no headlights, and the first car to flash their headlights at him is now his target. He is now required to turn around and chase that car and shoot at or into the car in order to complete his initiation requirements. Make sure you share this information with all the drivers in your family." And that essentially became the classic urban legend associated with don't flash your headlights. By far, that is the most common story told with regards to this urban legend. You've heard it, I've heard it, everyone else that you know of, friends, family members, co-workers, has heard it. It always involves a car. It always involves being the innocent bystander trying to flash your headlights. It always involves a gang member using this as an opportunity to be initiated, and then they begin chasing you. Interestingly enough, police officers there's not a single police force that has ever mentioned that they know of gang members doing this. It goes to show, again, the huge disparity associated with what people believe compared to what really happens. All the stations in California, in Massachusetts, in Texas, in Michigan, in New York, in Illinois, all these places where the rumor hit really hard during the 90s, not a single police force ever mentioned that this was truly going on. It just took on a life of its own because it kind of, in the back of people's minds, it made sense. If a gang was going to initiate somebody, what better way than to just pick a random person? And what better way to pick a random person than to have somebody who is just minding their own business and then picks themselves out of the line by essentially flashing their car headlights at you. So that's why it had that perfect storyline, so that way it made itself into the urban legend status that it has today. Also, interestingly enough, it looks like police officers themselves spread this rumor. It's kind of according to the research that I looked at. Some police officers would get these faxes in and thinking that, and not knowing for some reason about this particular story and the urban legend associated with it, they would in turn start passing it out as legitimate flyers because they were doing, in their minds, the right thing, which is good. I mean, they're thinking about the safety of people, but they would think to themselves, all right, let me pass this along so that way we can ensure that our community is aware of this. And so yet again, that's when it takes on a life of its own on there. And the only recorded instance of anybody really getting into trouble with this particular urban legend, there was a woman who was apparently had passed this along and passed it through a mall. Apparently she frequented that mall on a continuous basis, and maybe she became friends with people there. Maybe she knew the people that worked there, or maybe she knew the people that maybe she had people like family members that worked there. In any case, what she did was she personally took one of those flyers and then posted it and faxed it to every single store within the mall itself. And it was to the point where She was actually cited, given tickets. I don't know if she was actually arrested or not, but she was essentially arrested. Oh yeah, actually she was. My apologies. She was arrested for inducing panic. The woman's name was Ann Sibilla, and this was in Ohio. And she essentially just passed it along, faxed it to all the local businesses within that mall, and then that's where she got into trouble for it. So. But again, not really much else associated with this urban legend. There's nothing paranormal, there's nothing supernatural, nothing really in terms of creepiness factor. It's just one of those things that took on a life of its own, kind of like when one hears about the Bill Gates story of passing along this email and he'll give you $1,000 or something like that. He's trying to get rid of his money. It's just one of those things where people, for some reason, think it makes sense, and it does because it's a good story, and then it just grows from there. So, if anybody has any experience, any comments or thoughts or anything associated with this urban legend, and might know anybody that actually experienced this, or maybe if you experienced it yourself, who knows, maybe it is true. Maybe there was gang members that were using this as a form of initiation. And so if anybody has that particular experience, and in a weird way fantasy became reality based on fantasy, be sure to post your comments and share it below. So alright, thanks everybody, take care, bye.